the origin of races. Can you notice on the screen the variety of individuals that we have displayed there? You see varieties of skin color. You see varieties of eye shape. You varieties, of course, of hair color. Where did they come from? What is the origin of races? The first thing I'd like to say is that the Bible does not use the term race. You don't see that any place in the Bible. You do see in the Bible, Revelation chapter 5, verse 9, you see where there's going to be people from every kindred, tongue, people, and nation around the throne. Thank God the gospel will have reached many people, and thank God for our missionary efforts. Hundreds of different languages and from hundreds of different countries will be in the bride of Christ. Let's talk about some things. The Bible says that Eve was the mother of all living. Every single individual on the earth, every human being has way back in their ancestry as a great, so on, grandmother Eve. The Bible also says this, that God hath made of one blood all nations of men. I have never had a blood transfusion. If I needed blood, do you think that I would have any qualms about taking some blood from somebody from another, quote, race? Would I, on the table, I'm needing blood, I say, well, hey, wait a minute, before you put that blood in me, I want to make sure that it's blonde, blue-eyed, Caucasian blood. Does it make any difference whether somebody's skin color is different? He's made of one blood. I want it to be the same type. I want to make sure it doesn't have any venereal diseases. I don't want to have AIDS. I want to make sure that. But we're of all one blood. All human beings then were destroyed at the time of flood, with the exception of Noah and his wife and the 3 sons. So right now, all of us are descendants of these 8 people who were on the boat: Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and their wives. So how do we account for the origin of races? I'm sorry to say that when I first came into church, this was the explanation that I received. That, when Noah got off the ark, we hate to admit it, but Noah did get drunk. Ham uncovered the nakedness of his father. Exactly what happened, I'm not positive, but Ham did that, and Ham was cursed. The Bible says it. So we were told that he was cursed and became a black man. Pitiful, prejudiced type of idea, but that was one explanation. Now, I will give you another possible explanation. 3 brothers could look quite different. But more than the 3 brothers, by the time Noah's boys married wives, there were probably millions, billions, who knows how many people. And these 3 girls could look quite different. So, that's a possibility. And a possibility then that 3 races came from there. By the way, you can have brothers and sisters looking quite different. This is a case here, a picture of twins. This couple had twins, and notice one of them is Negroid and one of them is blonde-haired. This was in England, Lancashire, England. The mother being part Nigerian and the father being English. And these are not identical twins, but these are fraternal twins. When I was in Brazil, I noticed this blonde-haired child, white child, on the lap of what I would consider a Negro-type family. And I thought, well, maybe they adopted. No, it was their child. In fact, I know the family now. I was teaching this at Stockton, and there was a fellow who told me they have a lot of kids in their family, and the variation is immense in one family. Other people, family looks quite alike. Early evolutionists were racist. Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, had the subtitle, The Preservation of the Favored Races in the Struggle of Life. Definitely, Darwin was a racist, thinking that black man was somewhat intermediate between the white man and the animal. Huxley, known as one of the leading evolutionists, made a statement: no rational man believes that the average Negro is the equal of the white man. A professor of biology said this: the Negroid stock is more ancient than the Caucasian and Mongolians, Mongolians being more or less the Asian type race. The standard of intelligence of the average adult Negro is similar to that of 11-year-old Homo sapien. Boy, would that make people mad today. I've had the privilege, as I said, teaching professionally since 1959. I don't think the color of skin has anything to do with your intelligence. I've had some very brilliant students of all different races. This idea of superiority because you have white skin color is just a lot of prejudice and nonsense. Now, what are the results of evolutionary thinking? Well, probably the first was slavery. The United States, of course, brought over lots of slaves. And religious people tried to justify slavery by different means. And, of course, one justification is that, well, we're just training animals for our service. Nazism. Hitler, I mentioned before, his book, Mein Kampf, which means Mein Struggle, was dedicated to Darwin. It contains in it the worst of all of Darwin's thinking. And this was portrayed in his speeches, his writing, and so forth. He probably got the title, Mein Kampf, Mein Struggle, from Darwin's subtitle, The Preservation of the Favored Races. Hitler criticized the Jews for bringing the Negroes into the Rhineland. I think it's very interesting how it was political pressure that has changed evolutionists, not scientific evidence. Well, they didn't have any scientific evidence in the first place. Now, how do evolutionists account for the races? They have a hard time. One of them was the idea that the people went down to Africa. There was a lot of sun there. They got suntan, and they gradually adapted to become dark and passed on these dark characteristics. How did the Asians get these eyes that were like this? Well, you probably heard of Japan being the land of the rising sun in the Far East, and that they squinted in their eyes, and then as they squinted in their eyes, then that passed on from generation to generation. I think we told this earlier. This was Lamarck's theory of inheritance of acquired characteristics. Mice experiments, cutting off their tails over and over and over. I think some 22 generations they did that, and the mice still had tails. So evolutionary theory really has no explanation for the origin of races. I gave you a few earlier Christian quote theories. Here's a theory that I think makes probably more sense than any other. God confounded the languages at Babel. When people were forced to split up into small population groups, have you ever heard the expression, birds of a feather flock together? You just go to a foreign country sometime where they speak every other language and nobody's speaking English. How many have ever been in a situation like that? What do? If you find somebody who speaks English, you just like to communicate. You just naturally will gravitate to people you can talk with. I don't know how many languages the Lord split it up, but I do know this. The Lord did a fantastic job at the Tower of Babel. My website, www.doinggood.org. I have on there Bible study questions for all the New Testament, and I just finished Esther since I've been here, so I'm working on the Old Testament. I have had all the New Testament and part of the Old Testament translated in Spanish. I have the Book of Acts translated in German. Part of the Book of Acts in Sweden. I have quizzes for the Book of Acts in Tagalog. But where I've been most confused at all is when I went to Japan, and they got all these squiggles and lines that don't mean a thing to me. The Lord did a marvelous job. So obviously people were forced to communicate with the people who spoke the same language, and they probably were small groups. Now, when you do close breeding, then you start to get what are called recessive characteristics, and they are distinct physical characteristics. There's adequate genetic variation in the human genetic code to allow the development of a great number of distinctive features. I think that's where things like skin color, features of lips, the eye, which is not squinting because of the sun, that has an extra fold of skin, probably by close breeding, that's where different physical characteristics came about. But there's only one kind of man. There is not 3 different kinds or 5 different kinds. There's one kind. That's mankind. Because human beings of different, quote, races are freely fertile, interbreeding. Divisions among people are really not racial or physical, but they're linguistic. Humans are freely fertile. Blood transfusion. Humans are of one blood, and that is totally acceptable. What chemical is responsible for the skin coloring of all humans? I have here a banana. All of you have experienced this. You've purchased a banana. Well, maybe it was even green in color, and it turns yellow in color. You see now some brown spots on this banana. And if we let this sit another week, it would be very brown. Let it sit 3 weeks, it'd be black, wouldn't it? The only difference between somebody who's dark skin and light skin, the major difference is they have more melanin. We all have the same skin coloring, but some have more than others. They claim that the darkest individual has 1/30th of an ounce of melanin in it. 1/30th of an ounce. That's not a lot to get prejudiced.